The Hyundai Creta needs no introduction. King of the mid-SUV segment. It set sale charts on fire and had other C-SUVs quivering in their boots. But the tides are turning. Mahindra has just launched the Thar Roxx in India with incredible pricing. Now I know these two are not traditional rivals. The Creta, it has monocoque construction. The Thar Roxx has body-on-frame construction. They're vastly different SUVs, but their worlds have now collided. Mahindra has said that the Thar will be the #1 SUV brand in India above 12.5 lakh rupees. And that is exactly where the Creta is king. Welcome to Evo India and welcome to our comparison test of the Mahindra Thar Roxx and the Hyundai Creta. We're going to be comparing them on everything you need to know about them. Ride quality on good roads, ride quality on bad roads, comfort on the inside, space, features, ingress, egress, everything. And we're going to start with a drag race. But before we do that, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Evo India channel and leave a comment down below. Which of these two would you like to see in your garage? Okay, Thar Roxx versus Hyundai Creta drag race. The Thar Roxx, this is the diesel automatic rear wheel drive. We've got a diesel engine, 2.2 M Hawk. It makes 173 bhp, 370 Nm of torque. The Creta, on the other hand, is the turbo petrol DCT. It makes 158 bhp and 253 Nm of torque. And I know this is not an apples to apples comparison. That's a turbo petrol, this is a diesel, this has more capacity, that has less capacity. This is a torque converter, that has a DCT. But the turbo petrol Thar is actually quicker than the diesel Thar. So this is the slowest version of the Thar Roxx and that is the fastest version of the Hyundai Creta. So despite the gulf in power and torque, this should be a close fight. Let's see how it goes. Let's race. Alright, ready? And go. And off the line, the Thar pulls hard. That torque converter automatic allows for a much better launch. But I'm not leaving the Creta behind. In fact, it's pulling closer and closer and it's just overtaken me. And that's the line. The Creta, it is fast. It is properly fast. It's a combination of many things. That turbo petrol engine revs beautifully. The DCT, it's quick. The Creta is a lot lighter than the Thar, and all of that combines to allow the Creta to beat the Thar over the quarter mile, at least the diesel automatic versus the turbo petrol. Now, I wonder how the turbo petrol versus turbo petrol will do, but that is for another day when we have the turbo petrol on test. For today, the Creta is the quicker car over the quarter mile. Okay, now let's talk about ride quality. The Thar Roxx and the Creta are based on two very different platforms. The Thar Roxx is a body-on-frame. The Creta is a monocoque, and the characteristics of how these two cars behave on road is very different. Body-on-frames tend to be very robust, very hardy, but they also have compromises in terms of how they drive. They tend to be a little firm, they tend to be a little busy, a little jiggly all of the time. And when you compare the two, you realize that this remains true. The Thar Roxx is a huge improvement from the Thar that came before. You've got a whole new platform, better torsional rigidity, better bending stiffness. You've got a very sophisticated suspension setup, double wishbones up front. You've got a Pentalink rear suspension with a Watts linkage. You've got very sophisticated dampers as well. You've got frequency selected dampers. You've got hydraulic bump stops. So the tech that has gone into the chassis of this Thar Roxx is very sophisticated. And compared to the Thar that came before this, it does feel a lot more sophisticated. A lot of that stiffness and that jumpiness that the older Thar had is reduced to a large extent. The busyness of the ride, how much it jitters and jumps over a standard Indian road, that has reduced to a large effect. It just rides a lot more planted, a lot more composed, and it feels very solid. And then you compare it with something like the Creta, where the monocoque just adds so much comfort and stability to the platform. You realize that there are small shortcomings to the Thar Roxx. in terms of ride quality. The Thar Roxx, it does have that typical body on frames feeling, where it does feel a little busy on the road. It does feel like it's moving a little bit vertically up and down. When you go over a bump, it does jiggle a little bit. You feel it into the cabin a little bit more. That separation between body and frame does make itself apparent. And while it is really good, really comfortable, you can hammer down roads with a lot of confidence, there is a lack of sophistication compared to the Creta. You know, the Creta just feels like it irons out roads a lot smoother. Less of the road gets felt inside the cabin. When you hit a bump, it feels like it's ironing it out a little smoother. And the drive is a lot more smooth. That is the right word to differentiate the two. The Creta is a little smoother than what the Thar Roxx manages to be. When it comes to body on frame SUVs, the Thar Roxx is definitely one of the better ones out there. It really does a good job at keeping you comfortable in the cabin, but contrasted with a monocoque, there's no two ways about it. You know, the monocoque does have very clear advantages when it comes to just comfort on good roads. Another thing making the difference is the wheels. The Thar gets large 19-inch wheels. It also gets very chunky tires. So I don't think the effect of the 19-inch wheels is too pronounced, because you do get large sidewalls to cushion the road. But the Creta does get 17-inch wheels, and that does make a difference. But that said, the Thar can do loading a lot better. If you load up the Thar with a lot of people, a lot of luggage, it won't squat. And the Creta has a tendency to squat down if you load it too hard and sort of change the way it rides, because the rear is sitting so low, it bottoms out a bit and just changes the way it rides, and it's not very comfortable anymore. So if you're going to load up your car a lot, the Thar Roxx does a better job. Now let's step into the Creta and see what that's like. Get driving in the Hyundai Creta and you instantly feel a difference between this and the Thar Roxx. This feels a lot more refined in terms of the way it drives along our roads. Not in terms of NVH refinement, but just in terms of the way it soaks up our roads. It feels a lot smoother, a lot more comfortable, and a lot more settled. You know, it doesn't have that constant jiggling every time you hit a bump. It doesn't constantly jiggle. It just hits it once and settles down immediately. And that's one of the aspects that make monocoques so advantageous over body on frame platforms. The Creta, over the years, it has become a really nice car to drive. I remember when the first Creta came out, it was a really good package. It was really comfortable and all of that, but it didn't have that stability and the solidity that we'd come to expect from European cars. But that's changing with Hyundai over time, and this new Creta, particularly since they've stiffened up the platform, it feels very stable on our roads. It feels very composed. Like I mentioned earlier, 17-inch wheels, so it does have smaller wheels. That does play into its advantage. But the big advantage obviously comes from the monocoque platform and the advantages that it offers. The way it irons out bumps on our roads is very confidence inspiring. Smaller, minor undulations are filtered out without you even realizing, and those are actually magnified a little bit in the Thar Roxx. On a smooth highway, this glides along comfortably, it wafts along very beautifully, and very little unsettles it. You know, when you do have very bad roads, then the Thar does have an advantage, and we'll take these two cars out onto very bad roads to show you the difference over there as well. But on good roads, on smooth roads, on tarmac, where the roads are reasonably well paved, the Creta is certainly the better driving car. Inside the cabin, you just feel a lot more settled. Over long distances, it will fatigue you less because it doesn't move around so much, it doesn't bounce around so much. And if you're somebody who wants to sit in the back seat and drive up and down, then the Creta's ride quality will certainly play in your favor there as well. Now, like I mentioned with the Thar Roxx, the Creta doesn't deal well with loading. What happens is the rear squats down a little bit. It makes the rear very heavy. The front feels a little light. It also, because of that, it bottoms out the rear suspension very easily, and that's a problem with the Creta for a while now. It's not designed to be loaded up with 5+ luggage and all of that, and if you're going to do that, then Thar Roxx may be the better bet. But otherwise, for daily driving, for comfort in the city, for comfort over an average Indian road, the way this soaks up our roads is a lot better. It's only the larger bumps that you'll feel slightly in the cabin, but the smaller stuff just gets ironed out and evened out in a really effective manner. And the Creta is the benchmark in this class for good reason. It does so many things so well, and one of those things is the ride and handling package that it offers. The Creta's handling is also very confidence inspiring. The steering is a lot quicker for starters, so you have to steer less for the same amount of change in direction, which just makes it feel a little more nimble. The monocoque also handles really well. This new Creta is a pretty good handler. So when you chuck it into the bends, it does respond well. Your center of gravity is much lower down. The roll is a little more controlled. And the lateral forces you can pull before ESP cuts in or before you start understeering is a lot more in the Creta than in the Thar. So if you're going to be driving on twisty, windy roads and you're the kind that prefers hustling a little bit, you like chucking your car around, feeling that lateral grip, the Creta might be the better bet. Okay, so where the Thar really shines is when the roads get really bad. The Thar and its body on frame construction really highlights its strengths on stuff like this. You can just hammer over bad roads at good speeds without worrying about what's happening to the car, and it soaks up the roads pretty well, so you're pretty comfortable on the inside as well. It's not like you're being chucked around uncomfortably. This thing does a good job of soaking up bad roads. You've got incredible amounts of ground clearance. You've got large wheels and tires. These 80s, they help, no doubt about it, when it comes to grip on off-roady patches. You can just fling the Thar really quickly and have a lot of fun. The Thar also gets hydraulic bump stops, so when you do bottom out a wheel, for example, it isn't a loud, hard thud that comes into the cabin. It's a much more softer, gentler thud, and that again just increases the sense that this car is so capable and so comfortable on the rough stuff. I'm genuinely surprised at how good this Thar is on broken roads, and you need this sort of capability today in India because our roads in the cities have become utter messes, especially post-monsoon, where the rain washes away any semblance of tarmac. You've got these large potholes that can claim wheels, claim tires, but then you show up in something like the Thar Roxx and nothing's going to slow you down. So often in the city I find myself taking tracks which are flooded because I know the Thar Roxx can, taking tracks which are more broken because all of the traffic is just moved to one side to avoid it. You don't have to do all of that stuff in the Thar Roxx. You can just drive straight on with a smile on your face. How good is this thing? Unbelievable. You don't have to slow down for anything. Sure, it's rear wheel drive and it can't do super extreme stuff like rock climbing and sand and whatever you want, but for just rough use on rough trails which are properly packed, unstoppable. You drive the same track in a Hyundai Creta and immediately you slow right down because you realize the Creta is not as comfortable on these bad roads as the Thar Roxx is. First of all, you're sitting lower down, so you don't have the same commanding view and visibility. That immediately robs you of a little bit of confidence. But even if you jack your seat all the way up and look out over the bonnet of the Creta, you still don't have the confidence in the abilities of the car itself. The ground clearance is a lot lower. The suspension, because it's a little softer, it compresses more easily, and therefore you're more at risk of grounding out or bottoming out the suspension. I was carrying 40-50 kilometers an hour over these bad patches in the Thar, but in this I'm right down to 20. I don't want to damage a bumper, I don't want to break a radiator, I don't want to break the car. So because of that, your speed comes all the way down. These monocoque SUVs, they call themselves SUVs, but honestly their capability is quite limited. They make for very comfortable on-road cars, very capable, very well-rounded on-road cars, but show them the rough stuff, bad roads, off-road tracks, and their flaws start to come to the fore. Their limitations start to come to the fore. The Creta simply doesn't feel as confident on this road as the Thar Roxx, and in fact, even though we were really taking it very slowly, some of these tracks are very rutted and we did feel the bottom scrape in a couple of places. It's not a very nice feeling. So sure, the soft ride works wonders on tarmac, but out here where SUVs are supposed to SUV, there's nothing quite like the Thar Roxx. There's nothing quite like a body on frame platform to go beat some trails into submission. No one's going to stop you from bringing your Creta out onto a trail like this, but just like I am, you're going to have to cut your speed significantly and just be very careful. Whereas in the Thar, you can just have fun. Now let's talk about the features in these two cars. Both these cars are very well kitted out. Everybody wants features these days and manufacturers are delivering. In terms of common features between the two, there are a fair few. You get a wireless phone charger, you get an USB ports, both Type A and Type C, you get cruise control, drive modes, though the Thar Roxx only gets them on the diesel, ventilated seats, a 360-degree camera, branded audio, panoramic sunroof, and connected car features. But there are some differences between the two as well. The Creta does get some features that the Thar Roxx doesn't get. Most importantly, you get rake and reach adjust for the steering. This allows you to get into a really nice driving position in the Creta, and the Thar Roxx misses out on reach adjust. You also get dual zone climate control in here, a neat feature to have at this price point. But something that the Creta really misses out on is wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You still have to use a USB Type A cable to get CarPlay on here. The Thar Roxx, the steering wheel is adjustable, but it's only adjustable for rake, no reach. And the pedals are slightly offset to the right to make way for the dead pedal, and this makes for a slightly odd driving position. It takes some getting used to. You also get wireless CarPlay, that's a big plus compared to the Creta, and you get single zone climate control in here instead of dual zone like on the Creta. Next up is safety. Safety is a hugely important subject and we must talk about it. Both these cars get a number of safety features. You get 6 airbags, you get ISOFIX seats, and you get level 2 ADAS on both of them. However, there are some key differences. The Creta, it gets rear radars with its level 2 ADAS. So you get exit warning, which warns you if there's a fast approaching car when you're getting out of the car. You get rear cross traffic alert, plus you get rear cross traffic avoidance. The Thar, it doesn't get rear radars, but what it does have is a good track record with safety. The Thar 3-door, it has a 4-star GNCAP rating. The Thar Roxx, it hasn't been crash tested yet, but going by that track record and knowing that this is a newer, more modern, more sophisticated platform, I expect it to get either 4 stars or higher when it eventually does get crash tested. Okay, now the most important question I'm sure most of y'all are wondering is, what is the Thar Roxx like in the city? How is it like to drive in crowded spaces, and what is it like in the urban environment? First things first, visibility, great. Because you're sitting so high up, you've got great visibility of the road ahead. You can see really far ahead. You can see over the tops of other cars, and even visibility around the car is pretty good. Sometimes the fenders are a little hidden if you're sitting low down, but if you jack your seat up, you can even see the fenders, and then you've got great visibility all around. So placing the car in traffic, very easy. It's much wider than the Creta, so you can't squeeze it into the same gaps that you can squeeze the Creta into. The Creta does feel like it can trickle through traffic a little better, but people give the Thar a lot of respect on the road. When they see a Thar in their rear view mirrors, they generally move out of the way, they generally give you space. So even though it is a little wider, you do create your own space, if you know what I mean. Another thing that's nice about the new Thar Roxx is the steering. The steering is very light, it is very easy to use, the pedals are light. So when you're driving around town, you don't get fatigued too quickly. It is a very easy car to drive around town, and it isn't bulky and cumbersome to control and steer in traffic. That's a good thing, because on the daily you will find that annoying if it was really heavy and really cumbersome. The controls may not be as light and as slick as the Cretas, but they're nearly there, and it won't be an issue on the daily. Other things that make the Thar great around town: the 360-degree camera, always helpful. This is a much longer car than the 3-door. You've got that wheel sticking out at the end, so you've got to be careful of that. But with the 360 camera, placing it, driving it, parking it, all of that stuff is a lot simpler. The automatic also makes life easy, because you're not constantly shifting gears. You've got the auto as an option on both drivetrains, on the petrol as well as the diesel, to make it easier to drive. But it's not all rosy. The start-stop system isn't the slickest around. It has a little bit of lag, so when you're ready to go, you get off the brake and onto the throttle, and then it waits for a bit, then it starts up, and then it starts moving. So you've got a little bit of lag, and you just got to get used to that. Also, there are some annoying voice commands. When we were driving this, when it was on low fuel, when the car starts for the first time, it gives you a voice warning saying, hey, your car's fuel is low, please go to a fuel pump and get it filled, which is fine. But then every time the start-stop kicks in and it starts up again, I think the car thinks that it started for the first time, and it gives that same voice alert saying, please find the nearest fuel station again. And when you're in stop-go traffic, every 2 minutes it's giving you that voice warning, which is very annoying. Another thing that will affect the car on the daily is the ride quality. Like I said earlier, while driving it on the highways, the ride quality is a little lumpy. It is a little busy compared to the Creta's ride, and that's something you're going to have to deal with all the time. When you go over a breaker, you will feel it a little more in the cabin. When the road gets really bad, and to be fair, our city roads are really bad these days, the Thar is great because you can just hammer through stuff without a care in the world. But that constant busyness of the ride can get fatiguing. But then again, if that's a problem or not depends on your tolerance levels and what you want out of your machine. Now let's hop into the Creta and see what that's like around town. Okay, when you step inside the Creta, the first thing you notice is how compact it is. It feels a lot narrower than the Thar, it feels a lot shorter, and from the driver's seat, you can actually feel those dimensions shrink around you, which is a good thing, because driving the car, placing the car in traffic just feels a little easier. You occupy less space on the road, and the gaps you can fit into are smaller, and it's just a easier, more comfortable place to be. Visibility, it's good, but you don't have that commanding position that you have on the Thar. So when you're behind, say, a tempo or a truck, you're not looking high up and in front of it. You're stuck behind it and you can't see over it. And that's something most of these smaller cars have an issue with. The Thar just gives you that commanding, boss-like driving position that once you get used to, is very hard to get into something else. Other stuff that I like about the Creta: light controls. Very easy to use, very slick. The steering feels very nice and light. The controls are light. It's an easy car to drive in the city. The ride quality also is a highlight because it's less busy, it's less bumpy, and when you go over smaller breakers, smaller bumps, just general average road conditions in India, your Creta will keep you more comfortable and more isolated from the road below. So driving it for longer periods, over longer distances in the city or out of the city, like we said on the highway, it is a little more comfortable. When the roads deteriorate, I find that in the Creta, I've got to sometimes avoid larger potholes, or I've got to really slow down for them, which I don't need to do in the Thar. The smaller dimensions make it a little easier to park as well. You can slot into smaller gaps, you can slot into shorter parking spaces because it doesn't stick out so much from the back, and that just makes driving it around town a little less stressful. So yeah, the Creta as a city car, really well resolved. It does so many things so well, and that also explains its popularity. I mean, so many people just drive it around town as their urban runabout, and they're very, very happy with it for good reason. When it comes to presence, the Thar Roxx really rocks over here because it really trumps the Creta on every metric. It's longer, it's wider, it's taller, and it has larger wheels. When you see it on the road, when you see it side by side, the visual presence of this Thar Roxx is unmissable. Even out on the road, because it's such a new car, you get so much attention. Phones are drawn, questions are asked, people are coming up to us and asking us about this car. It's getting so much attention on the road. That presence that it commands is unbelievable. Plus the design, it's hard to hate this design. It really appeals to the child in you. It's simple, straight lines that talk straight to the heart. The Creta, on the other hand, it's a more generic looking car. The mid-size SUV segment is one of the most popular in the country right now, and the Creta is the most popular in that segment. So you see a lot of them. The design is very safe. You get this split headlamp design, you get the chrome up front, the proportions are right. It's a very sharp looking car, and honestly, in my opinion, it's a much better looking Creta than the last one. But in presence of this, it's not going to turn any heads. The Thar really wins the test when it comes to road presence. When it comes to practicality and storage spaces in the cabin, the Thar, it does make a few compromises. It's a lot better than the Thar 3-door, but it's not perfect. You've got a wireless phone charger tray here. Your phone fits here quite well. You've got this deep pocket in here, useful for a phone, for wallet, for small knickknacks. But when you get the four-wheel drive, this slot is going to disappear for the four-wheel drive lever. So, I mean, that's going to go. You've got two cup holders in here, and you've got a small pocket in here under the armrest. Another compromise is the door pockets. You've got a really tiny door pocket. It's enough just to slide in a 1 liter plastic bottle, and it just about fits. You really have to squeeze it in there, and then you've got no space for anything else. They've done that because they've tried to widen the cabin a little bit, but it's eaten into space. So practicality on the inside, it's okay, but it's not great. Back seat of the Thar Roxx. Space is not too bad actually. You've got a good amount of space. This driving seat is set to my position. I've got a little bit of knee room, but there are some drawbacks. I can't tuck my feet underneath the driver's seat if it's in its lowest setting. That makes under thigh support a little limited. It's got limited under thigh support over here. The backrest angle is nice. The seats support you well. You don't have blinds like you do on the Creta, but you do have this panoramic sunroof that really enhances the sense of space. Plus you're sitting really high up here. You can see over the driver's seat. It's a really dominating seating position. It's a nice place to be, but I think the Creta is going to be a little more comfortable. When you're talking about practicality, you have to talk about boot space, and the Thar actually has a much larger boot than that 3-door Thar. The 3-door Thar's boot was negligible. This is actually usable. 447 liters of boot space. But it's worth noting that in terms of its length, so from the end to the back of the seats, it's not as long as the Creta. So really long parcels may not fit in here. What it is really tall. So you get a lot of height and you could put tall stuff in there. Another thing to keep note of is that the Thar's rear door is side hinged. So you can't back the Thar up against the wall and then open the boot. You've got to keep a little bit of space. It's not a con, it's just something to keep in mind before you back your Thar up against a wall. Step inside the Creta and you realize how much better space has been used in here. It is a smaller car in terms of dimensions, but you have a lot more usable space in the cabin. You have a wireless phone charging tray over here. It's a lot deeper and you can actually store a lot more in here. You've got twin cup holders in here, par for the course. Your passenger gets a small tray in front of them and it has some ribs on it so that stuff doesn't slide around. Your underarm storage is larger. So this is larger and deeper than on the Thar. Again, very practical. And your door pockets are larger as well. You can easily fit a 1 liter bottle plus another smaller bottle and some knickknacks in there without any issues. You've also got a small slot in the armrest, which is essentially your door handle, that you can store change and toll receipts or whatever else small stuff you want to store in here. So space in the Creta is better utilized. It is a lot more practical in terms of how the space has been utilized in here. Stepping into the Creta, I do feel my impressions from the Thar were right. You do feel a little more comfortable in here for a number of reasons. One, this seat squab is a little longer, so you have better under thigh support, especially since I can tuck my feet in underneath this chair, which means I can rest my thighs on the seat squab. The space is a little less. The Thar actually has a longer wheelbase, but it's not too much of a compromise. I've got other cool stuff like the sunshade, which adds to comfort, especially on sunny days, and privacy. Plus, I've got this lovely neck pillow. The Creta also has a reclinable backrest. It's right now in its rearward recline angle, and it's actually a very comfortable back seat to be. If pure comfort is what you're looking for, the Creta combined with its more settled ride quality is the place to be. The Creta's boot, it's 433 liters, plus you get a parcel tray and it's flat, so loading it is not too difficult. Now let's talk prices. The Hyundai Creta costs rupees 20.1 lakhs ex-showroom for this exact variant. So you're looking at your turbo petrol, top-end DCT. The Thar Roxx, on the other hand, costs rupees 19 lakhs for the top-end diesel rear-wheel drive manual. The automatic prices aren't out yet, but by looking at the other automatics in the range, we can assume that this will cost 2 lakh rupees more than the manual. So I'm guessing rupees 21 lakhs ex-showroom. At that price, these two really do go head to head. Now, which one's the better car? Objectively, if you just look at the pure facts, there's no ignoring the fact that the Creta is the better car. It's quicker, it rides better on good roads, it utilizes space on the inside much better, the back seat is a lot more comfortable. If you're looking for a tool to move from point A to point B, and that's your reason for buying a car, I'd push you towards the Creta. It is a very competent machine. But the thing about us enthusiasts is that cars are not without emotion. Cars exist with emotion, and that's what the Thar Roxx brings to the table. It's such an emotional machine. It appeals to the child in you. Today, in this 5-door format, it makes so many fewer compromises than it ever has before, and it can actually go blow for blow with the king of this class, and that's really saying something. If you're an enthusiast, I'm going to point you towards the Thar Roxx, because it's going to put a smile on your face, it's going to put a smile on the faces of the people around you, and honestly, in my opinion, that is priceless.